The kettle had just started to hiss when I heard the faint creak of the hallway floorboards. Not the sharp kind that came from someone hurrying, this one was soft, measured, familiar. I didn't look up. 40 years in this kitchen had taught me which sounds meant which people. I could recognize June's steps even in my sleep. They were more of a drift than a stomp, like she never quite touched the ground all the way. I slid the tea tin open with a gentle clink and spooned 2 heaps of Darjeeling into the strainer. The same motion I'd done every morning since Evander passed. The routine helped. It filled the silences that came too easily now. A beat later, I felt the warmth of her beside me, still in her sleep shirt, her tiny arms folded on the counter, chin resting on top, watching me. Her hair was a wild halo of soft frizz and loose braids. She smelled faintly of minty toothpaste and her mother's expensive lavender detergent. "Couldn't sleep, little owl?" I asked, reaching for the cups. She shook her head, then paused, as if unsure how much she should say. I poured hot water over the tea leaves, letting them bloom. The scent rose up soft and steady. Then she leaned in, eyes wide, voice barely louder than the steam. "Grandma," she whispered, "they're gonna steal your money tonight." The cup in my hand paused halfway to the tray. I glanced down at her, careful to keep my expression light, unbothered. I smiled like it was a bedtime story gone wrong. "That's a strange thing to say, sweetheart," I said gently. "What do you mean?" June blinked slowly, then shrugged, almost embarrassed. I was supposed to be asleep, but I wasn't. Her small hand tugged at a loose thread on her sleeve. "I heard Mommy and Daddy talking in the kitchen. Daddy said, you had too much money for one old lady." I let out a soft chuckle that didn't quite reach my chest. Oh, he was probably joking. June's brows pinched together. He wasn't laughing. And Mommy said she could make it easier. That they just needed you to sign something. She said you'd be better off not worrying. The whistle of the kettle peaked and I turned away to silence it. My hands moved with practiced ease, pouring the water, setting the cups, dropping in a sugar cube for her and none for me. I didn't respond right away. My mind was suddenly too loud. I looked over at her again, this little person who still believed in tooth fairies and that hugs made everything better. "Are you sure you didn't dream it?" She looked up at me and said, without blinking, "I was under the couch. I hid there 'cause I wanted to sneak a cookie, but I heard them." Her certainty felt like a hand around my ribs. Not tight, not yet, just there. June reached for her tea, cupping it with both hands. "Do I have to tell them I told you?" "No," I said softly, crouching to meet her eye level. "You don't have to say anything. This can be our little secret." She smiled at that, relieved, then hopped off the stool with the energy only 6-year-olds possess and ran off toward the living room, cradling her mug carefully like a prize. I stayed there, kneeling by the counter, one hand resting on the edge just to anchor myself. The air had changed subtly, like the shift before a summer storm. I could still hear June's footsteps skipping down the hallway, and somewhere past that, the faint echo of adult voices behind a closed door. Not now, but later. That was how they always moved. Quiet planning, careful tones, things presented as gifts or kindness, always framed as concern. I stood up slowly, straightened my spine, and returned to the counter. I added a splash of oat milk to my cup, stirred with a long silver spoon the kind Evander used to polish after dinner, as though tea required ceremony. My hands were steady, but my chest was not. The kitchen, usually my haven, now felt staged. My tea, suddenly less about comfort and more about performance. I looked out the window, where the bird feeder swung slightly in the wind. 2 sparrows pecked at the seed mix, unaware that anything had changed. But I knew. Something had. I thought of Briar's recent interest in my financial documents. The way she'd asked for copies of my insurance policies, just in case. How Lev had offered to streamline my bills, to help ease the load. How they both had smiled while saying words that made my gut twist. Maybe they weren't planning something. Maybe they were just worried. But June had no reason to lie. And children, they often speak the kind of truth adults are too polite to admit. I exhaled, long and quiet. This was not the time for panic, or drama, or confrontation. I would stay the course. I would not show my hand. Not yet. I took another sip of tea and walked slowly to the front room where the light was just starting to brush across the floorboards. Outside, the world hadn't changed. But inside, something had settled deep within me, a watchfulness, the beginning of a line I wouldn't let anyone cross. I nodded, poured the tea, and pretended not to feel the house shift around me. There was a time when this house breathed differently. The walls used to hold the echo of Evander's footsteps, always deliberate, always just a bit too heavy. He didn't believe in slippers and saw no shame in squeaky floorboards. He used to whistle when he came in from the garden, muddy boots on the mat, tomatoes in one hand, a paper tucked under the other arm. There'd be jazz on the old radio, or a record if he was feeling nostalgic, and the kitchen would be filled with the scent of butter or cinnamon or compost, depending on the season. He used to talk to the house like it was a person, said it needed checking on, said corners collected not just dust, but feelings. The first winter after he died, I noticed I had stopped speaking aloud when I was alone. And after that, the house began to do the same. It didn't creak as often. It didn't hum. It simply waited like I did. It's strange how a house can learn your habits. This one had watched me become a wife, a mother, a widow, and a grandmother. It had seen every part of me worn down into service. Not because I resented it at first, but because I was good at it. When Briar was 8, she got pneumonia, and I slept upright in that old rocker for 6 nights straight, holding her hand while her fever climbed and fell like a tide. I remember the sound of her breath better than any lullaby. Years later, when she wanted to start her real estate business, I mortgaged this house to help her secure her first office space. "Just until I get my footing," she said. She got her footing. I never got my mortgage back. When Lev proposed to her, I was skeptical. Not outwardly, I smiled, clapped, toasted, but something in me knew he saw Briar as more than just a woman. He saw her as leverage, a connector to what I had, and what I might leave behind. He was never cruel, not even unkind, but he was clinical. Warmth was something he simulated like a good PowerPoint brief, polished and results-driven. A few years into their marriage, Lev offered to consolidate my bank statements, said it would make things simpler. "Don't worry, Eulalia," he told me with that rehearsed grin. "This is what I do." He did it too. Took over the utility payments, streamlined the taxes, helped me digitize old documents. It sounded like care, felt like care, until it didn't. At first, he'd print me reports, little charts and updates, color-coded and bound. Then they stopped. 1 month became 6. When I asked about it, he said, "Oh, right. I'll send those over." He never did. I never followed up. That's how it started. A trickle of oversight that I told myself was trust. But it wasn't. It was erosion. The slow giving away of pieces of yourself until you forget how many you had to begin with. And then came June. That child, unexpected, luminous, too wise in ways that made my throat tighten. When Briar went back to work 6 weeks postpartum, I offered to help. It wasn't a sacrifice. I wanted to. I fed June, bathed her, rocked her to sleep, sang songs that Evander used to hum when he thought no one was listening. She grew up tracing the grain in the dining room table with her fingers and naming the birds out back like old friends. I gave everything I had left to her, and for a while, that felt like enough. But slowly, something began to shift. Briar stopped asking if I could babysit. She simply sent a text, "Pick up at 2 today." Lev stopped calling to explain. He simply forwarded emails or invoices. There was no more, "Would you mind?" Just assumptions. Groceries began showing up with my card already attached. Subscription services I'd never approved quietly appeared in my statements. When I questioned them, Briar would laugh and say, "Oh, Lev probably added that. Don't worry, it's just a family account." Just. A word that shrinks boundaries. When did I stop being a person with a name and become a function? They never said it aloud, but I could feel it, the shift. From parent to placeholder. From matriarch to maintenance. From owner to dependent. And the house, faithful witness that it was, learned to mirror me. No more records. No more garden boots. No more singing to fill the silence. I moved quietly so I wouldn't wake anyone, even when no one was sleeping. I shut drawers slowly, padded across the floor, swallowed questions before they could make noise. I made myself smaller, not because I had to, but because it kept the peace. Or so I thought. The problem with peace is that, after a while, you confuse it with permission. They thought my quiet meant I wasn't paying attention. They mistook politeness for permission. But yesterday, June reminded me of something else. That someone was listening. That someone saw. And now I do too. The silence in the house wasn't peace anymore. It was waiting. It was late afternoon when I heard them. Not late enough for dinner, not early enough for dusk, the kind of hour where the light slants just right through the hallway window, and you can smell the day cooling. I was heading upstairs with a basket of clean towels folded so precisely it felt like a ritual. I still use fabric softener with a touch of lemon, something I learned from my own mother. Cleanliness, she'd say, isn't about presentation. It's about respect. For yourself. For your space. I was halfway up the stairs when I paused to shift the weight of the basket. That's when I caught it. Lev's voice clipped, low, precise, seeping through the half-closed door of the study. I froze. It's not that I was eavesdropping. Not deliberately. But once you hear your own name in someone else's mouth, curiosity is no longer a vice. It becomes instinct. She's not as sharp as she used to be, Lev was saying. I mean, come on. Last week she forgot her pin again. That's the second time this month. There was a pause. I could imagine Briar nodding. She always does, even when she's unsure. Especially when she doesn't want to be the one to say the thing out loud. She's overwhelmed, Briar's voice followed, smoother but no softer. The house, the accounts, everything. It's too much. Then Lev again. That's why we need to move on this. If we wait too long, she might get difficult, suspicious. But if we do it soon, we can frame it as support. He sounded so sure. Like a man describing the weather or his gym routine, nothing personal. Just inevitable. I set the basket down slowly, crouching just outside the door like a child hiding during hide and seek. My knees ached, but I didn't move. We start with power of attorney, he continued. Just a soft document. No pressure. Then we handle the accounts. If we're strategic, we can shift the deeds without drama. My blood ran cold. Briar exhaled. I hate how this feels. Like we're going behind her back. Lev didn't miss a beat. We're helping her. She's vulnerable, Briar. She's got too much sitting around, too many blind spots. If we don't step in, someone else will or she'll lose track. It's not safe. And then came the line that landed like a blade, paper thin but deep. If we move now, she won't see it coming. I pressed my hand to the wall. For balance? For grounding? I wasn't sure. I just knew I needed something solid. Inside the room, a drawer opened. Papers shifted. Briar said quietly, I still think we should talk to her first. Lev replied, we will, right after she signs. That's when I stood carefully, silently, and picked up the towel basket again. I didn't confront, didn't interrupt. I just turned and walked back down the stairs, my legs carrying me out of instinct. I set the towels in the hallway closet without remembering folding them. I moved through the rest of the evening like a ghost in my own skin. The dinner plates clinked just like always. June told me a story about a boy at school who ate glue on purpose. Briar smiled and said she was exhausted. Lev kissed June's head like he was auditioning for Father of the Year. And I smiled too. But I didn't taste my food. I was too busy replaying their voices in my head. She's not as sharp as she used to be. If we move now, she won't see it coming. No yelling, no plotting in shadowy corners. Just strategy over coffee. Quiet thefts wrapped in concern. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the reading chair by the window long after the house dimmed. My hands folded neatly in my lap, like I was waiting for something. Maybe I was. It wasn't fear that kept me awake. Not exactly. It was recognition. I had felt this before the moment, just before Evander's diagnosis, when I could tell something was wrong even though the tests were normal. The way he fumbled with a crossword clue he used to know. The way his hands trembled ever so slightly when buttoning his shirt. I had ignored it then, hoping I was wrong. I wouldn't ignore it this time. This was the same kind of quiet illness, only it wasn't in the body, it was in the bonds. The trust. The family. And this time, I would not let it grow unchecked. So, I made a list. It wasn't dramatic, just a small notepad tucked into the drawer of my nightstand. Things to check: bank statements, will location, property deeds, who still had access to my utilities, to my health records. I didn't write in full sentences, just fragments. Enough to jog the memory, enough to remind myself that the role of the grandmother is not to fade into the wallpaper, not while others draw maps over her silence. Let them think I was forgetful. Let them believe they were one step ahead. They'd already made one mistake. They thought I hadn't heard them. But I had, and I'd never forget what I heard. The morning after I overheard them, I moved slowly, not because I was unsure, but because every step felt loaded. Like I'd stepped onto a stage without meaning to, and now the lights were on, and the audience was already seated. I brewed tea, folded the dish towel in half twice, then once more, just to give my hands something to do. But the thoughts wouldn't settle. They fluttered at the edges like moths looking for flame. I needed clarity. I needed someone who'd tell me the truth, even if it hurt. So I called Marla. Marla Quinn had been my friend since the year Evander and I moved into this house. We met at a library board meeting, both of us rolling our eyes in perfect sync, when a man in a sweater vest suggested cutting the poetry section to save space. She'd been a journalist before retiring, the kind of woman who wrote headlines that made people nervous. She never softened her voice, not even when delivering bad news. I loved her for that. She answered on the second ring with her usual greeting: no hello, no pleasantries. What happened? That's how she always answered, as though she already knew something had cracked. I sat at the kitchen table, one hand cupped around my tea, the other pressing lightly on my chest. It's Briar, I said. And Lev. I think they're planning something. What kind of something? Her voice sharpened instantly, like a knife edge sliding along glass. Power of attorney, my accounts, my home. They're talking like it's already decided. My throat tightened. I heard them, Marla. In the study. She was quiet for a beat, not because she was surprised, but because she was sifting through the implications like a seasoned investigator. Then, calmly, "You're not paranoid, Eulalia. You're cornered. And that's when women like us get creative." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with what you already gave them," she said. "Your will. Any medical proxies. Banking permissions. Even the old things. Especially the old things. You'd be amazed what people think you've forgotten." I glanced across the room toward the cabinet where Evander's safe still sat behind the row of decorative teapots I never used. The safe had been his pride, a squat, fireproof box disguised as sentiment. Inside were documents, the original deed to the house, and a dusty manila folder that hadn't seen light in over a decade. "I still have the original will," I said quietly. "Good, that's leverage. I haven't looked at it in years." "Well, now's the time. Go get it. I'll wait." Her tone left no room for protest. I stood, heart thudding, and crossed the room. My knees cracked as I crouched down. The safe wasn't locked. Evander had stopped using the combination after his arthritis got worse, relying instead on a small brass key taped to the back of the silver tray in the dining room. I'd never moved it. I opened the door slowly, like the past might puff out in a cloud. Inside were neatly labeled envelopes, birth certificates, copies of June's school forms, and in the center, exactly where I remembered, was the manila folder with our will. I ran my fingers along the edge before pulling it free. Back at the table, I opened it, and there it was. Our signatures. Evander's in that steady slant of a man who never rushed, mine just beneath it. The terms were simple. The estate to be divided equally among our 3 children, with certain clauses to protect against early transfer or undue pressure. At the time, it had seemed thorough. But back then, we still believed people would do the right thing without being watched. "Do you see anything Briar or Lev could twist?" Marla asked. "Not yet, but it's what's not here that worries me." "Then it's time to update it. I don't want to make them feel—" "Oh, stop," she snapped. "This isn't about feelings. This is about facts. You're not disinheriting them. You're protecting yourself. And if they were trustworthy, you wouldn't need to." I looked out the window. June was in the yard with a stick, tracing a pattern in the dirt like a spell. Her ponytail bounced with each step. She was too young to know the shape of betrayal, but old enough to see when something didn't feel right. She'd felt it before I did, and she'd warned me. I couldn't afford to dismiss that. "You're right," I said finally. Marla chuckled. "Say it louder." "You're right. I need to get ahead of them." "You need a lawyer." "I'll find one. And make copies of that will. Store them somewhere safe. And don't tell a soul. Not even Roan. Not yet." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. She softened, just slightly. "They think you're predictable, Eulalia. That you'll go along like always. But you've always been smart. You've just been quiet." I looked at the will again, not at the text, but at the names written in my husband's hand. We hadn't planned for this kind of family fracture. But maybe now, I finally understood what kind of protection I needed. "I'd waited long enough," I said softly. "Now I'd wake up first." I stared at his name on the screen for a full minute before pressing call. Roan Fen. Middle child. My soft-spoken, long-limbed boy who used to stay up late asking about constellations and telling me he wanted to be a botanist. Who used to carry his lunch in a backpack twice his size and whisper facts about spiders while chewing cereal. The one who, somewhere between his father's funeral and Briar's rise to center stage, had quietly stepped out of the family current and let himself drift away. I hadn't heard his voice in over 6 months. We used to talk sporadically, but meaningfully. Then came the silences, the slow unthreading of our conversations. He never said he was angry. He just stopped calling. And I, foolishly, took his absence as peace. Now I needed him. Not for help. Not yet. But for clarity. Someone else to confirm I wasn't going mad. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. "Hey, Mom." His voice was calm. Not surprised. Not cold either. Just weathered. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied. "I hope this isn't a bad time." "Nah," he said, a pause. "I'm just repotting some violets." Of course he was. "How are they doing?" He chuckled. "Temperamental. Like most living things." I smiled, felt something tight in my chest loosen just slightly. The garden here's late this year. The rosemary's struggling. Evander used to say it needed grief to grow. Guess it's had too much. There was a silence between us, the comfortable kind. The kind you don't rush. "You sound tired," he said finally. "I am, but not in the way you think." More silence. Then, "What happened?" I exhaled. Told him everything. Not all at once. I started with the whisper from June. Then the conversation I overheard. Then the folder of documents. The timing. The careful tone Briar had taken on lately. Like she was speaking to a client who might back out of a sale. Roan didn't interrupt. Didn't make sympathetic noises or gasps. He just listened. Like he always did. When I finished, he said nothing for a moment. I could hear the sound of soil being shifted in the background, soft and gritty. Then he said, "You're not wrong. I've noticed it too." I blinked. "You have?" "Yeah. The last time I came by Thanksgiving, Lev tried to get me to ask you about consolidating your estate. Said something about cleaner lines of inheritance. I told him I didn't care about the lines. He didn't like that." I closed my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" He sighed. "Because it felt like stepping into someone else's game. And because I wasn't sure if you saw it too. I see it now. I figured you did. You've never missed much." Another pause. The kind where things unsaid live and breathe. "I should have said something," he admitted. "But Briar always talks like everything's handled. Like you're fine. Like she knows what's best. And honestly, I didn't want the drama. I didn't want to be the problem." "You wouldn't have been." "Maybe," he said quietly. "But Briar makes you feel like saying no is disloyal." My eyes stung. Not because he was wrong, but because it was the first time someone else in the family had said it aloud. "She's changed," I said. "She's always been like that." Lev just polished it. That surprised a small laugh out of me. Not because it was funny, but because it was precise. I looked out the window. June was outside again, her small hand trailing over the tops of the rosemary bush. She was humming. I could just make it out. A lullaby I used to sing. You don't have to pick sides, Roan, I said. I just needed to know I wasn't imagining things. I know. And you're not. You're being managed, not helped. That stung. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I'm getting a lawyer, I said. Updating everything. Good. I don't know how far they'll push. They'll push, he said flatly. Lev doesn't stop until something stops him. And Briar, she won't question him unless someone makes her. I don't want this to rip us apart. It already did. You just didn't see the seams. I let that hang, because he wasn't wrong. Then, softly, he added, call me if you need backup. The words were simple, but they landed with weight. Not a promise to fight, not a vow, but a hand, extended. Maybe not all the way, but far enough to remind me I wasn't as alone as they wanted me to feel. Thank you, Roan. He cleared his throat. And Mom? Yes? I miss your garden, even when it's struggling. I smiled at that. It misses you too. We said our goodbyes. Nothing dramatic, no declarations, just quiet understanding. The kind only two people who've walked away from the same wound can share. After I hung up, I returned to the garden, not to fix anything, just to sit. The rosemary still looked wilted, but it was holding on. And so was I. I've always been a light sleeper not by choice, but by evolution. Motherhood rewired me that way. One cry from the crib, one cough in the night, and I'd be upright before my brain could even catch up. It never really wore off. Even now, decades later, I hear every floorboard, every click of the front door, every whispered, just one more episode, from June's bedroom, past her bedtime. So when Briar and Lev began whispering just a little too carefully, started tucking folders into their tote bags with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, I didn't need confirmation. I just needed proof. And proof, I knew, was best gathered in silence. So I started playing the part they wanted to cast me in. I let myself fumble for words during breakfast. Not too much, just enough to make Briar offer a concerned smile. Mom, you okay? You've been a little off lately. I nodded absently and said, oh, just tired. I think I forgot to take my boilve again. That was all it took. She gave me a gentle pat on the shoulder like she was helping a child tie their shoes. They were watching me now. I could feel it, tracking how often I repeated myself, measuring pauses. Lev started using phrases like, for your peace of mind, and just to simplify things. I smiled and nodded. Not because I believed him, but because I wanted him to believe I did. The first recorder I bought was small, about the size of a thumb drive, shaped like a novelty pen. I tested it by narrating the grocery list and playing it back in the laundry room to make sure it was clear. Then I bought two more. One hidden inside an old ceramic owl in the dining room. A gaudy thing I'd always hated but never had the heart to throw out because June thought it was funny looking. The second went under the hallway bench, where shoes came off and secrets were exchanged. And the third? That one I planted beneath the rosemary bush out back. It wasn't poetic. It was practical. The rosemary sat near the patio table, where Briar and Lev liked to take their wine in the evenings and talk things through. They thought the garden was a neutral zone. They forgot I was still listening. The folder Briar left on the kitchen counter, just in case, was thick and cream-colored, with a navy blue ribbon I'm sure she thought made it look official, almost friendly. It sat there for 3 days before I touched it. She never once asked if I'd reviewed it. She assumed I would, or that I wouldn't. Either outcome worked in her favor. I opened it late one night, long after the dishwasher had sighed its last rinse, and June was tucked in with her worn plush fox under one arm. I sat at the table with a notepad and a glass of ginger tea, wearing a Vander's old cardigan for courage. Inside were at least 30 pages. Power of attorney, durable medical proxy, a pre-written letter of consent authorizing Lev to act on my financial behalf, and a document outlining succession planning for the house. Succession like I was already gone. The language was slippery. Optional yet recommended. In case of sudden incapacity, to reduce administrative burden. The words weren't sharp, they were soft and sweet and full of intent. A lullaby wrapped in legalese. They were building a paper path toward my erasure. What stood out most wasn't the documents themselves, it was the timing. Each clause was dated. Each step pre-planned. They'd already spoken to an attorney. They were simply waiting for me to play my part. I closed the folder and placed it back where I found it slightly off-center, as if I hadn't read it at all. Then I took my notepad upstairs and started listing everything. Original will. Located. Safe. Intact. Bank access. Call first thing Monday. Lawyer. Find new, not family, connected. Power of attorney, never signed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I'd done all that already years ago, when Evander died and the house echoed too loudly. Now wasn't the time for grief. Now was the time for strategy. They thought I would sleep through it, that I'd smile while they boxed me into the kind of quiet life they could manage from afar. That I'd sign papers without reading them because they wrapped them in good intentions and familial warmth. But I didn't sleep. I planted my feet, and my recorders, and the first seeds of resistance. The next morning, Briar made pancakes. She never made pancakes. June beamed at her mother and said, "You should cook more." Briar laughed and said, "Mom deserves a break, right?" Then looked at me with a smile that could have passed for love, if I didn't know what she was serving on the side. I smiled back and poured the syrup. Let them believe I was soft. Let them think I was slow. Let them call this a kindness. While they planned behind my back, I was documenting it in real time. They thought I'd sleep through it. Instead, I planted a recorder beneath the rosemary. Briar had set the table with cloth napkins that still had the store creases. She never used the good ones unless company was coming, and even then she acted like ironing them might be a step too far. But tonight, the corners were crisp, the wine glasses sparkled, and the silverware didn't match because, of course, she'd brought her own set from home. Ours, she claimed, were too vintage to be functional. Lev came in carrying a paper bag from that little fusion bistro downtown, the one, where everything is served on slabs of slate with a flourish and a bill that makes your jaw tighten. He declared it proudly, like he'd cooked it himself, then handed me a bouquet of lilies. Lilies. Funereal and fragrant. "You didn't have to do all this," I said with a smile I had trained into muscle memory. It lifted just enough to seem sincere. "Of course we did," Briar replied, squeezing my shoulder like I was a fragile vase. "You deserve to be pampered, Mom." "Where's June?" I asked, scanning the hall. "Oh," Briar said quickly. "She's at a sleepover. She was so excited. Wanted to go early." I nodded, but something coiled inside me. June hadn't mentioned it, not once all week, and she never skipped our Saturday night tea ritual without telling me. Briar must have arranged it last minute. On purpose. Out of the way. Out of earshot. We sat down around the dining table, flickering candlelight dancing across polished glasses. I could see Lev watching me, subtle and deliberate. Every time I picked up my fork or paused to sip water, I felt his eyes on my hands, like he was measuring steadiness. Like he was waiting for a tremor that would make their plan seem justified. Briar uncorked the wine, poured generously into each glass, then clinked hers gently against mine. "To family," she said, and Lev echoed it with a smile that barely moved the corners of his mouth. I raised my glass, let it touch theirs, and took a sip. Dry, heavy, too much tannin. We made it through salad-some blend of arugula and pomegranate and too much vinaigrette before Briar set her fork down carefully and folded her napkin across her lap. "Mom," she said gently, "there's something we've been meaning to talk to you about." There it was. The lights didn't dim. No dramatic thunder. Just the soft click of strategy in motion. I put my fork down too, mirroring her grace, and waited. "It's just," she continued, glancing at Lev for confirmation. "We've noticed that things seem a little overwhelming lately. The house, the bills, all the moving pieces." Lev leaned forward, elbows resting neatly on the table. "And we've been thinking it might be time to let us help a little more, just to ease some pressure." I tilted my head, giving them the face of a woman who hadn't already heard this rehearsal. Then Briar reached into her tote bag and pulled out a slim manila folder, the kind lawyers use when they want you to sign quickly without asking questions. She slid it across the table toward me, her manicured fingers brushing the edge like it might break if handled too harshly. "These are just some simple documents," she said lightly. Power of attorney, a memory trust, just basics. Nothing changes unless you want it to. It's just in case, really. Lev nodded, too eager, as if he thought they'd finally reached the finish line. It'll help us help you. Think of it as a safety net. I opened the folder slowly, glancing at the first page without reading it. My phone, resting innocently beside the water glass, had been recording since the moment the candles were lit. It caught every word. Briar softened her voice to something saccharine. There's no pressure, Mom. We just care about you. We want to make sure you're protected. I let my hands shake slightly as I turned another page. Not much, just enough to make Briar exchange a look with Lev. I murmured something vague about needing time, about wanting to read everything carefully. Lev nodded like a priest at confession. Of course, take your time. The room was quiet. No jazz playing, no June giggling in the background, just the hum of someone waiting for a signature. I set the folder down and offered the kind of smile that used to earn me extra credit at church bake sales. Thank you both, I said sweetly. It really means a lot that you're thinking about me. Briar reached for my hand. Her grip was cool and steady. We just love you. I know, I replied, and gave her fingers a reassuring squeeze. We finished the meal like nothing had happened. Talked about the weather, about a new store opening downtown. Lev told a story about a difficult client. I laughed in the right places. After dessert store-bought tiramisu spooned into my crystal dishes for effect, I stood, thanked them again, and said I was feeling a bit tired. Briar helped clear the dishes. Lev offered to lock up. All perfectly choreographed. Once upstairs, I changed into my nightgown, brushed my hair, and slipped the folder still unopened into my knitting bag beneath a half-finished scarf. Then I turned the lock on my bedroom door and leaned against it. They thought this was the end of the conversation, but they'd just started a war. I thanked them sweetly. Then I slid the folder into my knitting bag and locked my bedroom door. The law office sat in a quiet corner of town, tucked between a bakery that smelled of yeast and sugar, and a consignment shop that never changed its window display. The sign on the door read, Simone Reyes, Esquire. In simple gold lettering, no slogan, no overpromises, just a name and a door that didn't creak when it opened. That, in itself, gave me comfort. Marla had insisted on her. Not a family lawyer, she'd said firmly. You don't need someone who knows your Christmas cookie preferences. You need someone who can dismantle a trust fund with a ballpoint and a stare. And Simone Reyes had both. She was in her mid-40s, maybe a bit older, with close-cropped hair, and a wardrobe that didn't waste time trying to look soft. Her office smelled faintly of coffee and lemon disinfectant. No plush chairs or overdone florals, just clean lines, dark wood, and shelves lined with law books so well thumbed they looked like they'd been read for pleasure. She stood to greet me, her handshake firm. Eulalia Fenn, she said, like it was a name she already respected. Marla told me you'd come prepared. I hope I have, I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. I slipped the folder from my knitting bag and placed it gently on the wood. There's quite a bit to get through. Simone opened the folder without ceremony, scanning the top document as she reached for a pen. She didn't bother with small talk, and I was grateful. We spent the next 2 hours in a steady, almost surgical rhythm. First, the will. She read through it line by line, making notes in a notebook with neat, controlled handwriting. When she reached the clause about equal distribution among my 3 children, she tapped her pen once and looked up. This is fair, she said, but fair doesn't always mean safe. She explained the importance of conditional clauses, ways to protect against undue influence, against coercion masked as care. Together, we added stipulations, mandatory waiting periods before any property could be sold, and language affirming that any change to the will required a certified medical evaluation of my cognitive state, not just the signature of a single physician. Next, the power of attorney. The document Briar had pushed across the table at dinner was broad too broad. It granted sweeping authority over everything from medical decisions to financial control, with no expiration date and no oversight. Simone raised an eyebrow. This is the kind of document you give if you never want to see your bank account again. I nodded. I haven't signed it. Good. We'll make our own. She drafted a new power of attorney form with specific parameters. It named me, solely, as the holder of my decision-making rights, unless I became legally incapacitated. In that case, authority would pass first to a co-decision maker of my choosing, and if that person declined, control would not revert to family, but to a legal guardian appointed by the court with prior consent from me, on file. "Do you have someone in mind for co-decision making?" she asked. I hesitated. My first instinct had been to say Roan. But Roan still carried the kind of quiet grief that made him unreliable in crisis. So I said, "Deidre." Simone didn't blink. "She's the youngest?" "She is." She hesitated when I told her about Briar and Lev, but she didn't lie. "That matters to me." Simone nodded, writing it down. Then came the account access review. I handed her a list of old shared loginsum from years ago, when Lev offered to simplify things. She raised a brow when I mentioned the joint line on my utilities and the dormant investment tracker Lev once helped set up. "I want to revoke everything," I said, "even if it means inconvenience." "Convenience," she replied, "is how people like Lev win." We changed passwords, set up two-factor authentication, moved my savings into a new account under my name alone. I signed documents until my hand ached, but with each signature, the weight in my chest loosened. When I mentioned that I'd been recording recent conversations with Briar, Simone gave the faintest smile. "Smart," she said. "Keep doing that. Save backups. Transcribe them. Make multiple copies." I did as she instructed. I gave her everything, every piece of doubt I'd collected, every whisper, every pattern. She listened. Not with the strained kindness people reserve for the elderly, but with the focus of someone who knew exactly what this was. Not a family squabble. Not a misunderstanding. A quiet takeover. At one point, I said it aloud more to myself than to her. "My daughter wants to own me." Simone didn't flinch. She just opened her pen again and said, "Let's make sure she can't." By the time I left the office, the sun had dipped just behind the bakery roofline, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I carried a folder thicker than the one Briar had offered me, filled with language she'd never get past. I walked to the corner bus stop, slower than I used to, but steadier than I'd been in weeks. They thought I was drifting. They thought I'd go along, the way I always had. But now, I had signatures that said otherwise. And a lawyer who, when told that a daughter wanted control, didn't gasp or coddle. She reached for her pen. I wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel owned. I felt armed. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Thick, cream-colored, embossed return address, no return name, just a seal the kind lawyers use when they want you to feel the weight before you even open the flap. I was at the kitchen sink, rinsing a chipped saucer when I saw it propped neatly against the bread box, where Briar must have left it that morning. She hadn't said a word, no mention of paperwork, no nervous smiles, just a casual, "Have a good day, Mom," before slipping out the door with her travel mug and that curated breeziness that had become her trademark. I dried my hands, opened the envelope, and began to read. Petition for legal guardianship. Filed jointly by Briar Fenley Kostova and Lev Kostova. On the grounds of diminished mental capacity, impaired judgment, and increased dependence on others for financial and daily matters. My name, Eulalia Fenn, sat at the top of the form like a nameplate at a hearing I hadn't agreed to attend. The document went on in detached, professional tones, weaving concern into condemnation. She has demonstrated repeated confusion regarding basic tasks. There have been instances of misplaced mail, forgotten appointments, and lost personal items. She expresses frequent uncertainty regarding financial matters and has begun to show signs of cognitive decline. Fabrications, all of them. Yes, I had asked Briar once if a doctor's bill was legitimate because the envelope had no return address and the font was inconsistent. Yes, I had misplaced my reading glasses twice because June liked to use them for her detective missions. And yes, I'd forgotten to buy dish soap last month. But since when did that qualify as incompetence? At the bottom of the page, attached as supporting evidence, were 2 letters. One from a colleague of Lev's, someone I'd never met, who described witnessing clear signs of confusion during a dinner I hadn't attended. And another from Briar, softening the attack with words like concerned and worried and best interest. They were trying to take everything, not through confrontation, but through quiet bureaucracy. They filed it like it was mercy, but it was theft in a suit. I sat down at the table, the same table where Evander once laid out college brochures and mortgage options and crossword puzzles half finished. I folded the petition once, then twice, then unfolded it again and pressed it flat. My hands didn't shake. My pulse didn't race. I just felt cold. I called Simone immediately. She answered on the second ring. Eulalia? They filed. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. I'll be at your house in an hour. By the time she arrived, I had already pulled out everything we'd prepared. The updated will. The new power of attorney. The revoked account access. The backup recordings. And the transcripts meticulously labeled and notarized. Simone didn't waste time. She read the petition in silence, her eyes scanning line after line. When she finished, she looked up and said simply, "They underestimated you." I exhaled. I think that was the point. "Don't worry," she said. "We've got them beat before we even get to court." She outlined the plan like a general before battle. First, we'd gather corroborating statements from people who had interacted with me regularly, the pharmacist, the bank teller, even June's teacher, who'd seen me pick her up without fail, week after week. Then, we'd secure a fresh evaluation from a neurologist, someone with no ties to the family, whose sole job would be to determine objectively whether I was, as they claimed, slipping. Simone already had the appointment scheduled. And then there was the jewel in the crown. The recording from the dinner. Briar's voice light and controlled. "There's no pressure, Mom. We just care about you." Lev chiming in. "It's just in case. For your peace of mind." Simone grinned like a chess player who had cornered a queen. They walked into their own trap. "Still," she added, "we need to be thorough. They'll be smug now, but if this fails, they'll spin it as martyrdom. We have to close every door." I spent the next few days preparing. Not hiding, preparing. I went to every appointment, answered every question. I was tested, poked, scanned, interviewed. Each result added another nail in the coffin of their case. There were no signs of dementia. No impairment. No suggestion of incompetence. What there was clarity. And a paper trail they couldn't manipulate. At night, I sat by the window with my tea, June asleep in the next room, her small breaths like soft punctuation in the silence. The same silence that once mirrored my loneliness now held something else, a waiting power. Let Briar smile through court. Let Lev wear his best tie and pretend he was only trying to protect the family. I knew what they were doing. And I knew, now, how to fight it. They'd picked the wrong woman to corner. Because I wasn't backing down. I was walking straight into that courtroom with truth and proof, and a name they'd never steal. The courtroom smelled like lemon polish and nerves. It was colder than I expected. Air conditioning turned just high enough to make you uncomfortable, to remind you that nothing warm happens here. The judge, a compact woman with sharp eyes and a restrained impatience, presided like she'd heard every story before, and didn't have the time to be impressed. Briar wore a beige dress and pearls so polished they reflected the overhead lights. Lev looked freshly barbered, his tie blue and unwrinkled, a man who'd read enough legal blogs to know appearances mattered. Together, they sat at the petitioner's table, hands folded neatly, pious, sympathetic, and false. Simone sat beside me, calm and composed, her briefcase organized into color-coded tabs. She whispered, "You don't have to do anything theatrical. Truth will do." I nodded once, then kept my eyes forward. The judge called the hearing to order. Briar stood, voice soft as fabric. "We're here today out of love. We believe my mother, Eulalia Fenn, is experiencing early signs of cognitive decline. We're asking for limited guardianship, for her safety and peace of mind." She sounded so reasonable. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed her myself. Lev chimed in next, citing financial disorganization, frequent confusion, and emotional volatility. He referenced late payments, mixed-up medications. A missed family dinner fabrications built on half-truths and twisted details. He even held up a printed email from his business partner, that same ghost who claimed I'd forgotten my own address at a dinner I'd never attended. I didn't flinch. Then Simone rose and introduced her evidence. Updated medical evaluation. Neurologist's report clear. Bank statements with perfect audit trails. Recordings from the dinner. Transcripts from my meetings with Simone. The judge leaned in slightly, her interest piqued. And then Roan walked in. He wasn't supposed to speak. I hadn't asked him to come. But there he was, jacket wrinkled, tie crooked, expression steady. He raised a hand to be sworn in, then stepped up to the stand with the quiet dignity of a man who had made his peace with awkward truths. "State your name," the clerk asked. "Roan Fenn." "Relation to the respondent?" "I'm her son." Simone nodded toward him, and the judge allowed the questioning to begin. "Mr. Fenn," Simone said, "you've remained largely outside this guardianship process. Why come today?" He looked over at me, just for a second, then straight ahead. "Because I started watching, and what I saw didn't add up." "Can you be specific?" Roan pulled a folded printout from his jacket pocket. "This is a text I got from Breyer 3 days before the missed dinner they referenced. She says, and I quote, 'Don't tell Mom about the dinner until morning. I want to see if she remembers.'" A small murmur rippled through the courtroom. He continued, voice even. "She didn't forget the groceries. You never told her there was a dinner." He handed over phone records timestamps, call logs, even an email showing Lev had requested shared access to my accounts under the subject line, "Consolidation, discreet." Simone let the silence settle, then asked, "Do you believe your mother is unable to care for herself?" "No," Roan said firmly. "I believe she's being cornered by people who think they're smarter than she is." Breyer stiffened. Lev didn't move. Roan stepped down, didn't say another word, just returned to the gallery, folded his arms, and waited. Now it was my turn. I rose slowly, not for effect, but because my knees were stiffened, walked to the small podium. The microphone made a soft click as I leaned in. "My name is Eulalia Fenn. I am 70, 1 year old. I have raised 3 children. I managed a household, a marriage, a budget, and a garden for 40 years. I read every label. I track every expense. I forget things, yes, like everyone does, but I do not forget who I am." I paused. My daughter and son-in-law have dressed their concern in legal language. But this is not love. This is control. And I will not sign my life away just because someone says please with a polished smile. I looked directly at the judge. I am not confused. I am not lost. I am not incompetent. I am still here. I sat down. The judge didn't speak right away. She thumbed through her notes, her jaw tightening as she reread a passage from the petition. Then she looked up at Breyer. "Miss Kostova," she said, "do you have anything further?" Breyer opened her mouth, then closed it. "No, Your Honor." The judge's voice was crisp, final. "This court finds no evidence to support the claim of diminished capacity. The petition for guardianship is denied in full." Her gavel hit the wood like thunder. I didn't look at Breyer. I didn't need to. I heard the sharp breath she took, the way Lev leaned slightly away from her. I felt their certainty collapse. The judge didn't look confused. She looked furious. The courtroom emptied slowly, as if no one wanted to be the first to move. The judge had already left the bench, her black robe vanishing behind the heavy oak door. But the silence she left behind was louder than her ruling. Breyer remained seated, her hands folded in her lap, knuckles white. She looked like a woman trying to calculate a version of events where this hadn't happened, where she hadn't just been publicly stripped of her performance, where the lines she rehearsed, the letters she commissioned, and the concern she'd practiced in the mirror had actually worked. But they hadn't. Not today. Lev, on the other hand, wasn't stunned. He was seething. He stood stiffly beside her, his jaw tight, eyes flicking toward Simone and then to me with the flat glare of a man who had lost control of a carefully built narrative. His fingers kept brushing down the front of his tie, as if grooming would somehow return dignity. Neither of them looked at Roan. Simone began collecting our files, stacking notes, sliding transcripts back into labeled folders. her expression a blend of calm victory and professional satisfaction. She didn't say anything. Not yet. She knew the value of quiet after a win. And I just sat there for another moment, breathing. Not smiling, not triumphant, just still. Because this wasn't a battle I'd wanted. This wasn't justice I celebrated, not in the ordinary sense. This was damage control. A fence rebuilt after the wolves had already tested every weakness. I didn't feel joy. I felt relief. And beneath that, something colder. Clarity. When the judge had delivered her ruling, it had been swift, decisive. The court finds insufficient and unsupported evidence to declare the respondent, Eulalia Fenn, incapacitated. The medical evaluation submitted by the petitioner is not credible and lacks independent verification. Her eyes had flicked to the printed email from Lev's business associate, the so-called dinner witness. Additionally, she had said, the court notes that many of the incidents cited by the petitioners were either exaggerated or demonstrably fabricated. She glanced at the transcript Roan had provided, the one with Breyer's text. Don't tell Mom about the dinner until morning. I want to see if she remembers. The judge tapped the paper with her pen. That is not concern. That is entrapment. Simone hadn't needed to say much after that. The judge read aloud sections of the dinner recording, noting my composure, Breyer's repeated emphasis on no pressure, and Lev's suggestions about access and control. Finally, she looked at me. Miss Fenn, she said, this court commends your preparedness and your restraint. It is clear you took proactive, responsible steps to protect your autonomy. You are competent, capable, and frankly impressive. I had nodded, murmured, Thank you, Your Honor. That was all. But it was enough. Now, as the courtroom settled into post-hearing murmurs and rustling papers, I rose. Breyer turned toward me, not fully, just enough to see if I would offer something. A word, a look, maybe a chance to rewrite the scene into something softer. But I had no interest in smoothing her discomfort. She had tried to own me, not just my name on paper, my choices, my presence, my freedom, and she had done it with the language of care. I just want what's best. I'm worried about you. This is for your peace of mind. What a dangerous thing concern can be in the wrong hands. She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it. Lev didn't look at me at all. Roan stepped up beside me, his hands in his pockets, quiet as ever. You okay? He asked under his breath. I nodded. Tired, but whole. Simone joined us, her bag over her shoulder, her gaze sweeping briefly toward Breyer and Lev. They may try something else, she said. But this was their biggest move, and they lost it on record. Let it stand, I replied. Some defeats deserve permanence. We exited without a single backward glance. No dramatic pause at the door. No sharp retort over the shoulder. I didn't need to win twice. Outside, the air was warm and clear, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. I felt them behind me, Breyer and Lev still inside, likely regrouping, still trying to frame themselves as misunderstood children rather than orchestrators of legal betrayal. But I wasn't their mother in that moment. I was something they hadn't expected. Unyielding. Simone turned toward her car. Call me if you need anything else. And update your passwords again, just to be safe. Roan gave me a half smile. You were a wall in there. No, I said quietly. I was a door. They just didn't expect it to close. We walked down the steps side by side. I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt like planting something, like making tea, like telling June a story about how, once upon a time, her grandmother stood in a courtroom and said, enough. They had called it guardianship. The court called it attempted control. I sold the house in under 6 weeks. It surprised the realtor, who expected more back and forth, more hesitations. You raised your children here, she said gently, as if the walls should have been sacred. But I didn't owe that house anything. I had already buried what mattered inside it. I didn't cry when I signed the papers. Not when I boxed up the dishes Evander and I got for our 25th anniversary. Not when I closed the door to the guest room where June used to nap. Not even when I folded the quilt from our first year and sealed it in plastic. I packed methodically, room by room, one memory at a time. a kind of quiet exorcism. Briar didn't reach out. Not to ask where I was going. Not to say goodbye. Lev, of course, remained silent. Roan came on moving day, unshaven and tired from work, with a box of bungee cords and a bag of sandwiches that neither of us ended up eating. He didn't speak much, just helped me wrap the mirror from the hallway and secure the trunk that held Evander's books. At one point, as we were rolling up the old rug from the dining room, he looked at me and said, "You sure?" "I am," I replied. "This house doesn't know me anymore." He nodded like he understood, because he did. The new place was small, 1 story, 2 bedrooms, tucked on the edge of a quiet senior living community just outside town. No one told you when to water your plants. No one showed up with documents or decisions disguised as favors. It had wide windows and clean light, pale walls, floors that didn't groan under the weight of memory. The garden was a narrow strip of soil behind the kitchen window, flanked by a white fence and a patch of hummingbird sage that the previous owner had left behind. I liked it immediately. Not because it was impressive, but because it was mine. Untouched. Unmanaged. The first night in the new cottage, I sat on the back step with a cup of ginger tea and listened to the quiet. Not the performative kind that masks tension, but real quiet. The kind that settles into your bones and tells you, you are safe now. No footsteps overhead. No creak of a door opening to deliver an urgent favor. No Briar. No Lev. Just space. Space enough to think, to breathe, to become something other than useful. I moved to a house where no one knew my Wi-Fi password but me. And that was no small thing. Marla came by the second weekend. She brought wine and basil starts in a cardboard tray. "We're planting these," she said, not as a suggestion. "Basil means peace." I raised an eyebrow. I thought rosemary meant remembrance. She smirked. "Yes, well, some things we remember, others we bury." We planted the basil just before dusk, her nails already stained with soil, mine still shaky from the courtroom aftermath. She didn't ask about the hearing. She had read every transcript. She already knew. We worked in silence, a comfortable one. She pressed the soil around the final sprout, then sat back on her heels. "You ever think you'd start over at 71? I brushed dirt from my palms. "No, but I didn't think I'd have to defend my sanity in front of a judge either." We both laughed. Short, dry, but it felt real. Roan and June came the following Sunday. She bounded through the front gate like she'd been born in this garden. Her little backpack bouncing, her hands clutching a handful of drawings, colorful crayon, scrawls of birds and a house, and a woman labeled Grandma with 2 miss and a heart. "This is your new house?" she asked, eyes wide. "It smells like lemon and books." "It is," I said, "and I picked the smell myself." She grinned and handed me a packet of sunflower seeds. "These are from my school garden. I saved them for you." Roan stood behind her, watching quietly. He looked around the place, nodded slightly. "It suits you," he said. I bent down to June's level. "Want to help me plant them?" We spent the afternoon digging shallow holes, patting down soft earth. She pressed the seeds in carefully, one by one, whispering stories to each like she thought they'd grow better that way. I didn't stop her. I hoped they would. Later, we sat under the trellis eating lemon cookies and listening to bees. June told me she'd started a journal. Said she wanted to be like Marla, writing things down so the truth doesn't disappear. "She says if you don't write the truth, people will tell it wrong," she added thoughtfully. "She's right," I said, "and some truths are too important to lose." She leaned her head against my shoulder and asked, "Will the seeds remember where they came from?" "Maybe," I said, brushing the dirt from her fingers. "But it's more important they know where they're going." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded anyway. I don't hear from Briar. I don't wait for her to call. Lev's name hasn't come up, and I won't be the one to speak it. Some losses don't deserve a memorial. Some endings don't get music. But here, in this quiet house with its honest floors and its honest light, I am not lost. I am not erased. I am planting. I am reading. I am remembering what it feels like to belong to myself. We planted basil. Marla said that meant peace. I'm starting to believe her. It's been 53 days since the verdict. I know. Because I marked the first one on the calendar Marla gave me when I moved into the cottage, a quiet gesture with watercolor birds on each page, and a quote about wisdom tucked under every month. April's quote read, "Peace does not mean to be in a place where there is no noise or trouble. It means to be in the midst of those things and still be calm in your heart." That first square was marked with a star, not because of the courtroom victory, but because of what came after, the silence. Breyer hasn't called. Not once. No texts. No voicemail shaped like an olive branch. Lev hasn't emailed. Not even a passive-aggressive, just checking in. Nothing. At first, I waited for it. The call. The apology that would try to dress itself in grace. The kind that begins with, "I didn't mean to hurt you," and ends with a subtle request for something I no longer owed them. I even left the ringer on for the first few nights. Not because I wanted to hear from them, but because I wanted to know whether they'd dare to speak after everything they'd tried to take. But the phone never lit up. And slowly, I realized I didn't miss it. I didn't miss their updates about office renovations or vacation plans. I didn't miss Lev's advice about long-term finances that always included phrases like, more efficient control. I didn't miss Breyer's careful inquiries that weren't questions at all, just permission slips for her decisions. What I had mistaken for family for so long had been something else entirely: expectation, obligation, performance. And now? Now there was only stillness, not absence, not abandonment. Freedom. The days have grown into their own rhythm here. I wake up when the light arrives, not when anyone schedules me. I make breakfast slowly: toast with marmalade, or oatmeal with a swirl of honey. Some mornings, I sit on the porch with my tea and let the sun warm my face before I speak a single word. I've started rereading old novels. The ones I kept boxed up in the attic for years, telling myself I'd get to them someday. Now, someday arrives every afternoon between 2 and 4, with a cup of chai and a folded quilt across my lap. I'm halfway through The House of Mirth, and I think Lily Bart would have liked me better now than she would have 20 years ago. There's a walking trail just past the mailbox loop. It winds behind the community, through tall pines and a few flowering dogwoods. I go there most mornings, sometimes alone, sometimes with Marla if she's not buried in one of her projects. The first time I made the full loop without stopping, I stood by the edge of the pond and cried, not because I was proud, but because I remembered how it felt to do something for no one else's benefit but mine. I joined the garden club. We meet once a week in someone's backyard. We drink iced tea and talk about pests and compost like they're people we used to date. It's funny and ridiculous and small and more nourishing than any dinner Breyer ever invited me to out of courtesy. I've started baking again. Not because anyone expects dessert, not because it's someone's birthday, but because I like the feel of dough between my fingers. Because the smell of cinnamon and browned butter reminds me that I am still a woman who can make something from scratch and not offer it up as proof of my usefulness. I thought I'd feel invisible when I left the house behind. That I'd shrink in a neighborhood of strangers. That I'd fade without the scaffolding of expectation holding me up. But I was never the one disappearing. They just stopped looking. And I'm still right here. Present. Whole. Accountable to no one but myself. When I pass the mirror in the morning, I no longer search for the woman Breyer wanted me to be: polite, pliable, out of the way. I see my own mother's cheekbones. I see the line between my brows that Evander used to trace with his finger. I see a softness, yes, but a sharpness too. The kind earned from holding your ground without raising your voice. Sometimes, June calls on her dad's phone. Her voice bright and steady, telling me about a book she read, or a flower she saw that looked like it came from space. She ends every call with the same sentence: "I miss you, but I know where to find you." And that's the difference. Breyer is quiet because she was exposed. Lev is quiet because he failed. But June is quiet only when she's thinking. And when she speaks, it's never to control. It's to connect. I don't need a flood of apologies. I don't need reconciliation carved in stone. I just need this. My rhythm. My name. My stillness. Breyer hasn't called. Lev hasn't emailed. That's not silence. That's freedom. The basil was blooming. Soft, green spires stretching toward the early spring sun, their leaves still tender enough to bruise with too firm a touch. June hovered above them like a guardian, her tiny watering can tipping forward in steady rhythm, her tongue poking out in concentration. She wore a straw hat, 2 sizes too big. One she insisted was her garden helmet, and a pair of mismatched socks that peeked out from her rain boots. The watering can had ladybugs on it. The hose was coiled nearby. Unused, she preferred the ceremony of the small. I watched her from the back porch, a chipped mug warming my hands. Chamomile. No sugar. Just the way I liked it. Just the way I used to drink it before life got noisy with everyone else's needs. June knelt beside the basil, her fingers carefully pinching off a leaf that had begun to yellow. She turned her head just slightly, her voice no louder than the rustle of wind through sage. "You're safe, Grandma." The words came unprompted, like a truth she'd carried in her chest for weeks, waiting for the right moment to place it gently in my hands. I smiled, not the practice smile I used to wear like armor, but the real one, the one I thought I'd lost somewhere in the fine print of guardianship documents and family dinner ambushes. I said, setting the mug down beside me. "I am safe." She turned back to the herbs and kept watering, but I knew she'd heard me. I could see it in the way her shoulders softened, in the way her breath seemed to settle. A bird chirped nearby. The neighbor's wind chimes offered a half-hearted tinkle. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed, not intrusive, just a reminder that life, in its ordinary rhythm, goes on. I walked down the 3 porch steps and joined her in the dirt. My knees weren't what they used to be, but the ground was soft, and I was stubborn. She handed me the watering can without a word. I tipped it slightly over the rosemary. The scent hit me instantly sharp, familiar, layered with memory. "They thought I'd sleep through it," I said. Half to her, half to the wind. June looked up at me, curious. "They thought I'd let them take everything." Quietly, like I didn't know what was mine. She studied me for a long moment, that unblinking, 6-year-old kind of stare that sees through skin and down into bone. "Why?" she asked finally. I pressed my hands into the soil, felt the warmth of the sun baked into it, because sometimes, when people want something badly enough, they pretend it's already theirs. And it wasn't? "No," I said softly. "None of it was." She nodded, as if filing that away for a rainy day. "And what did you do?" she asked. "I got up first," I told her. "Before they did. Before they could finish the sentence. Before they could rewrite the story." June's eyes widened, full of something between awe and understanding. I reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "One day, if someone ever tries to erase you, your name, your voice, your worth, I want you to remember something." "What?" I leaned in, just enough that the words would land like a spell. "You'll get up first, too." She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She turned back to the basil and went back to watering, her small hands steady and sure. Later that evening, after June had gone home with Roan and the light had dipped below the fence line, I sat on the back porch again. The herbs whispered in the breeze. The garden beds were lined with tiny markers she had drawn crooked letters labeling each plant: basil, mint, lavender. A few were smudged from water, but the names still stood. So did I. The silence that wrapped around me now wasn't the silence of being ignored. It wasn't the hush of manipulation or the quiet of compliance. It was my silence, chosen, owned. And inside it, I had found something I didn't know I'd lost, not just safety, but self. They had tried to decide who I was, what I needed, what I could handle. But I knew. I always knew. They just didn't think I'd say it out loud. They thought I'd sleep through my own erasure. I didn't. I got up first. If your family tried to steal your name, your voice, your worth, would you pretend to sleep? Or would you get up first? Let me know in the comments. And if this resonated, 2 other stories are waiting right here.